What do the Resident Evil 4 remake, God of War, the Metal Gear Solid remasters, and a new installment from a little game in 2003 called Resident Evil Outbreak have in common? Is it the hulking monsters? The unforgettable characters? Daddy issues that change the course of history?
No, they were all part of the NVIDIA GeForce Now leak in 2021, where a list of then unannounced PC titles released online. In the months that followed, many of those games did release, and NVIDIA confirmed that some of the games on that list were legit, but others were placeholders. So we still don't know if this new Resident Evil Outbreak game is real.
But would this very first-gen attempt at a multiplayer Resident Evil game even appeal to modern audiences? And is there anything we could change to modernize the title without removing what worked? So join me as we relive the good old days of 2020 and practice social distancing. Fight gentrification, get obsessed with Tiger King, kill your houseplants, return to the office, and defund the police. Back when I was a wee lad, my mother knew a marketing executive at THQ who got me into E3 at the LA Convention Center.
Now E3 is the place where everyone comes to find out the games that you are going to be playing this year, next year, and the year after that.
In 2003, that included Half-Life 2, Halo 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy X-2, and the original Call of Duty. But the most fun I had that day was at a bank of kiosks networked together. I didn't recognize the game at first, but the zombies, herbs, weapons, and RPD uniforms were unmistakable. This was Resident Evil, but not like any Resident Evil game I'd played.
Attention everyone. Due to the riots in progress, this area will be closed off soon. Please proceed to this checkpoint immediately. If you do not leave the area in time, we cannot guarantee your safety.
Resident Evil Outbreak is a cooperative multiplayer game where you and a group of other survivors try to escape the release of the G virus in Raccoon City, parallel to the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. You pick from 8 survivor characters, each with their own abilities, but what appealed to me was that only one was an RPD officer. Resident Evil games always featured an arcing power balance, where you begin the game disempowered, left to fend for yourself with only a few bullets against the horde, to overpowered by the end, wielding a grenade launcher, a magnum, or a chicken egg. But Outbreak's characters were not stars. They were the real people of Raccoon City. You had Kevin, armed with a caffeine addiction and a dark web copy of Premiere; Alyssa, a journalist with a talent for unlocking doors who can land critical shots; Cindy, who can hold more green herbs than anyone else; David, who can make repairs, build custom weapons, and turn you immediately bisexual; George, who can make new healing items; Jim, who can play dead and have everyone ignore him; Mark, who excels at melee weapons; and Yoko, a university student with a larger backpack who can carry twice the inventory of anyone else. And it was up to you to keep them alive. But this was easier said than done. Outbreak zombies and more were always encroaching on your position, and you'll never have enough ammo to wipe them out before a room is overrun. So you'll need to solve the area's puzzles quickly while your teammates hold off the horde if you want to see daylight. And Outbreak offered far more ways to accomplish this than a traditional Resident Evil game. If zombies start clawing at the door between you and them, one player could hold the door in place. If there are boards and nails nearby, you could create a barricade. Can't find the key to the next room? Some doors can be broken down, but you will be open to attack while you do. While inventory management has always been part of survival horror, your characters only had 4 slots instead of the series' standard 8, meaning your teammates had to juggle what they were carrying if someone had to pick up a key item. You don't win all-encompassing victories in Outbreak scenarios. You survive by the skin of your teeth because your virus exposure is always ticking up at the bottom of the screen. Your virus exposure can be temporarily slowed or paused, but never reversed. If you come in contact with a zombie or take too much damage and need to be revived, that meter starts to spike. And if it hits 100%, the game's not over, but you turn into a zombie and hunt your former teammates. Outbreak contained 5 chapters taking place in the streets of Raccoon City, a burning hotel, a freezing umbrella lab, a hospital where you get Nemesis stalked by a man covered in leeches, and a university where a cure for the virus might be found. Depending on the character you chose, your story might play out very differently. Going back to Yoko, while her bio says she's a student, she's actually an Umbrella researcher who had her memory erased. If you play as Yoko during the mission below freezing point, or anytime your party encounters an Umbrella employee, you get a different series of events and cutscenes than you would without her, as the survivors in the lab will recognize their coworker. There's even 32 potential endings to Outbreak, 4 per character for each of the 8 characters, based on your choices in the final scenario. This was a staggering amount of story depth for a multiplayer-only game in 2003, and one of the many ways Outbreak was ahead of its time. But being ahead of your time isn't always a blessing. In the early 2000s, the original Xbox set itself apart by offering an Ethernet port in all of their consoles, meaning Xbox could deliver a much larger audience for multiplayer games. Well, actually, the Dreamcast had one first. I know the Dreamcast had one first, but 5 people know that console, calm down. Versus their counterparts on the PlayStation 2, who could only access the internet if they purchased an extra device.
Without a network adapter, you're not getting online.
And Outbreak was a PlayStation 2 exclusive, meaning that although many of us own that console, only a fraction of PlayStation owners could play Outbreak.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Kevin, you don't play multiplayer games because you hate people, and that's not true. I don't play multiplayer games and I hate people, but Outbreak was the best kind of multiplayer game, where no one could interact with you.
When looking up reviews of Outbreak, you'll quickly see complaints about the chat system. When I played this for the first time, what made our team successful was being in the same room to collaborate on puzzles and call for help. But when testing Outbreak, Capcom saw that once players became familiar with the maps, they would spoil the solutions to all the other participants just to finish as fast as possible, diminishing the experience for anyone playing it for the first time. So Outbreak built its own chat system where characters could only bark simple prompts to each other or request an offer items, but not communicate over mics, even though the technology to do so was already there. Alternative chat systems have worked in multiplayer games because failing was expected and easy to recover from. But in Outbreak, failing due to poor communication could mean the end of an hour-long run. So by talking to each other, the most fun I had playing Outbreak was when we were playing it wrong. The game started as a much larger project. Its 18 proposed maps were condensed down to 5 on launch. A year later, a sequel called Outbreak File 2 released with 5 more, including a zoo full of mutated animals, the Raccoon City subway, the Arkley Mountains, the RPD station from just before Resident Evil 2, and we even get a pet tyrant in another visit to Umbrella. Adding to player frustrations were long loading times and the dead stupid NPCs whose heads are as empty as my soul, making the game much more challenging in single player because your bot teammates would waste ammo, watch as you get pummeled, and require you to solve the puzzles all by yourself. And if you were playing in Europe, you could only play in single player with bot teammates. PAL regions never even had online added to the game, rendering reviews in Europe, Australia, South America, and large parts of Asia far worse than Japan or North America. Outbreak sold 1.45 million copies. Not a slouch, but well below the main titles. Outbreak File 2 sold far less, convincing Capcom to put the series to bed, shutting off the servers for good in 2007. But the series' ambitions for co-op horror experiences wouldn't rest for long.
Welcome to Africa. My name is Sheva Alomar.
A few years later, Resident Evil 5 introduced Sheva Alomar, the series' first persistent partner in the mainline games, controlled by either another player or the game itself alongside series veteran Chris Redfield. Following up Resident Evil 4 was no small feat, but taking what Capcom learned by introducing Ashley as a companion in the last game, 5 managed to top the sales of 4 by over 1 million copies. And 5 even borrowed a boss design straight out of Outbreak. The man covered in leeches who chases you throughout Outbreak's hospital shows up as the Ouroboros boss in 5, and both of them are defeated by trapping them in a furnace.
But finally, in 2012, Outbreak's director Eiichiro Sasaki got a second chance. Not just to direct a new game, but Capcom's biggest game yet. Filled with everything you loved from Outbreak, multiple co-op campaigns, huge set pieces, your favorites from the cast in gigantic action sequences, this would be Resident Evil's ultimate horror entertainment. And nobody liked it.
Okay, some of you liked it, and Resident Evil 6 is a story for another video, but it was considered the first big miss in the mainline series, and Sasaki never directed another game again. Even so, Capcom was investing heavily into multiplayer experiences, which deviated hard from what fans liked about Resident Evil to begin with, such as 2012's Operation Raccoon City, where you follow Resident Evil 2's Hunk as a Spec Ops unit working for Umbrella, trying to wipe out Dr. Birkin and any BOWs standing in your way, or 2016's Umbrella Corps, a team-based shooter where you compete in a series of deathmatch or random modes. This one was so unfinished they didn't even label it Resident Evil. Due to the poor reception of the first two, their next iterations would be free-to-play experiences, bundled with the latest mainline titles and remakes. 2020's Resident Evil Resistance had the hard luck of being packaged alongside the remake of Nemesis, the only remake that wasn't met with near universal praise. In Resistance, 4 survivors are held captive in an experiment run by a fifth player, one of the series' villains. You choose from 6 different players, including Valerie, an intern at Umbrella who became suspicious when her coworker lost her memory. They're just toying with me now. Remake the game! This would be the closest Capcom ever got to remaking Outbreak,
mashed up with a score-based timer for mercenaries.
You have a procedurally generated series of rooms to escape from, and the unique mastermind mode where you play as the mad scientist out to make sure these 4 survivors never see the light of day. And finally, packaged with Resident Evil Village, we got Reverse, an undercooked hero shooter starring the cast as they deathmatch to the RPD station in 2, the Baker House in 7, and the Village in Village. If you're killed in Reverse, you can mutate into Nemesis, Jack Baker from 7, or, I don't know, Grimace, and exact your revenge. But 3 levels and 1 game mode is not enough to lure Resident Evil players back online. Outbreak isn't totally dead, though. A group of fans relaunched an independent server that anyone can join, and you're watching me play on that server with live partners right now, with the Japanese versions of Outbreak 1 and 2 patched to English. But with every multiplayer iteration that no one was asking for, the community has cried louder, why not just remake Outbreak? Now that I'm all grown up in present day, I still see references to Outbreak in the recent games, like the cops we all see in Outbreak's RPD level all named in the remake of 2, the bar from the first scenario in the remake of 3, or Alyssa Ashcroft showing up as a journalist in 7. It seems obvious, but Capcom has only recently, after a decade with their fingers in their ears, started giving fans what they want. However, Outbreak is a very V1 multiplayer game, and not only have tastes changed since 2003, but so have expectations for what this game would need to be. We can only theorize what's held Capcom back from making a File 3 or rebooting Outbreak from scratch, but the point brought up most consistently is replayability. If an Outbreak remake were included with the next mainline title or remake from Resident Evil, it would be funded through microtransactions. I know no one likes talking about monetization, but you better believe Capcom is talking about it, and once you complete Outbreak's campaign, there's not much reason to return to the same 5 to 10 levels over and over again. There are secrets to find, some randomness to item placement, but that's not enough to keep most players coming back, and Capcom knows it. Surely you could add challenges and alternate modes or a progression tree to unlock new abilities, but what it's lacking is a strategy layer allowing veteran players to continue growing their skills over time. However, if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed a theme amongst these other games. They're all built to be versions of other more successful multiplayer games with Resident Evil branding.
Operation Raccoon City is primarily 4 players in co-op advancing through waves of rampaging enemies, similar to Valve's own Left 4 Dead.
Umbrella Corps didn't entirely know what it was trying to be, but there's clear DNA from Rainbow Six, Call of Duty, or Counter-Strike. Resistance was 4 players trying to escape an evil mastermind while that 5th player tried to stop them, just like Dead by Daylight. And Reverse barely has enough content to justify its release, but Capcom likely built this game to mimic other successful hero shooters, like Apex Legends or Overwatch. So Capcom seems to want these titles to follow in the footsteps of an already proven formula to shape their game around. Let me know in the comments, how would you modernize Resident Evil Outbreak? Would you leave it untouched, advancements be damned, or tweak the formula to appeal to modern audiences? I'll go first. Is there a multiplayer game that might give Capcom the direction they're looking for and add additional replayability to a game like Outbreak? 2018's Among Us exploded in popularity in 2020 thanks to Twitch streamers and a world mostly locked inside. Like Outbreak, your team of crewmates have to complete a series of tasks on a map. If you complete them all, you win. Also like Outbreak, this game was designed without voice chat. But now with social voice platforms like Discord, players could create custom games with their friends and choose for themselves how they'd like to interact. But unlike Outbreak, one or a few crewmates are secretly working against the group as imposters, trying to take out the crewmates while casting suspicion on the other players. If the imposters kill or whittle down the crew, then they win instead. So how would this additional layer fit into a game like Outbreak? First off, Outbreak made today wouldn't have the technical limitations of the previous entries. It would have all new ones. There could be more players per game, fewer loading screens, and more robust voice chat. Second, the solutions of the puzzles are still relevant, but less important, as completing them wouldn't be your sole objective. And third, this already fits thematically into the Resident Evil universe and Outbreak, as the Umbrella Corporation was gathering test data on its bioweapons during the Raccoon Raccoon City incident, and one member of the cast is an Umbrella employee with their memory wiped. So what if there could be a randomly chosen sleeper agent working for Umbrella against your team? Suppose sleeper agents could take out the other survivors, but the agents would lose if they were found out, so they had to be sneaky about it. Two survivors pair up to go get a key item, only one comes back. The remaining player says the other died in a zombie attack, and maybe they did. Or maybe the living player took them out. If the sleeper agent is the last one alive, they win. There doesn't even have to be a sleeper agent activated in every game, but there could be a random chance that one character will have their erased memories returned to them, and they realize they need to sabotage their friends. That way, if the team starts struggling, the remaining players won't know if there was sabotage happening or not. Suppose that person could not only secretly create progression obstacles, but summon in creatures at exactly the worst time for the crew to manage. Would that deviate too far from what made Outbreak unique, or would it modernize a dated formula? Or is part of Outbreak's appeal that it isn't modern?
Because revisiting Outbreak made me realize this game will never bring me as much simple joy as that day at E3 again. Because I don't experience joy that simply anymore. For all our talk about Capcom withholding this from us, I could fire up the PS2 and play this anytime. The game didn't change. I did.
But will any of this happen? We know Capcom A had a game called Resident Evil Outbreak in the Nvidia leak, B has released free-to-play multiplayer games as add-ons to their main titles, C structures those games around existing multiplayer properties, and D, with Resident Evil 9 and a remake of 5 being all but inevitable, it's possible we'll see a new Outbreak when those games are ultimately released. As the first multiplayer Resident Evil game, it got a lot right, and I think we all want to see some version of that remade. But if we want to see a remade, rebooted, redesigned Outbreak in today's market, we may need to accept that sometimes it's better to evolve than fade away. But what do you think? Should Outbreak be remade at all? And if so, what changes would you like to see to make it thrive in today's multiplayer market? While you're here, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, it really does help the channel grow, and smash subscribe so you can catch the next video too. Thanks for watching, have a great day!